President Donald Trump is back to attacking his predecessor, Barack Obama. His latest round of tweets using the trending hashtag Obamagate comes after Obama criticized his administration's response to the COVID-19 crisis. So what is Obamagate all about? Why is Trump so worked up? And how should we evaluate his administration's response to the pandemic? To discuss all these issues and more, I'm pleased to be joined by Chen Hong, professor at the East China Normal University, and Professor Jeffrey Sachs, director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, and later, Laura Schwartz, U.S. political commentator. That is our topic, and this is Dialogue. I'm Wang Guan. Professor Sachs, in New York City, why don't I go to you? In this recording obtained by Yahoo News, Obama described the Trump administration's handling of the coronavirus. He called it a, quote, an absolute chaotic disaster. What do you make of Obama's criticism?
Well, I think it's accurate, unfortunately. We are now at almost 83,000 deaths. The virus continues to spread around the United States. We have hundreds or 1,000 to 2,000 deaths per day, and there's no clear policy or guidance from Washington. Even the president's science advisor speaks differently from what the president says. So it's been horrible. And I think Obama was expressing what most of us know and many of us say every day about the situation, which is that if you face a crisis like this, you need decisive action, clarity, principles, guidelines, because this is a battle against a very deadly virus, and it has to be handled in a very systematic way. But Trump is not systematic at all. He's incapable of thinking in systematic terms.
Professor Chen, I saw you're nodding and nodding a lot. Do you want to add to what Professor Sachs had said?
Yes, I agree that Mr. Obama's comments are actually quite adequate in his description of the situation. I think largely the scenario in the United States has been, largely divided and disassociated at different levels, at the federal level, at the between the among the various levels, and even within various levels, there have been, a lot of, disassociates and lack of coordination. That is actually what has been contributing to today's scenario, in which, in Obama's words, a kind of, disorientedness, a kind of chaotic disaster. That is actually quite adequate in describing today's situation in America.
Well, Professor Sachs, but what do you make of the timing of this? Opponents of Obama would say that, look, the former president came out and said all that he said 6 months before the general election. What about his political agenda, behind what he said?
Well, he's not running for office, of course. Under our Constitution, he can't run for re-election.
But it's helping his former vice president, I suppose.
Well, I was wondering for weeks and weeks why he wouldn't say something, because our country needs leadership. We're in the hands of an absolute incompetent person, and people are dying in large numbers. So we need our well-known figures to speak up, actually, clearly. So even though President Obama did not make this statement as a public statement, apparently it was somehow taped by somebody and given to the press. I don't think Obama meant it for that way. I wish he'd give an actual speech that was very clear, because right now we're in a very deep crisis, and it's as if we don't have a president or a leader that knows what he's doing. In fact, Trump makes everything worse, not even solving any problems, because he's a man of confusion, lies, meanness. What we need is leadership that is clear, based on science and evidence, and actually succeeding in ending the epidemic in the United States, as China has done, as Australia has done, as New Zealand has done, as many countries have done to control the epidemic. Why can't the United States do it? Well, the main reason is that our president is incompetent, unfortunately, because if you don't have leadership, you cannot fight a battle like this. It's trying to win a war without any generals. There are lots of lieutenants all over. They're governors, they're mayors, but there's no leader in the United States of competence right now. This is a big challenge for us because so many Americans are dying, and this is a disaster from a human point of view and also from an economic point of view.
All right, Professor Chen, I want to ask you a question, but before I do, I want to show you this quote from the former U.S. President Barack Obama. He said, "What we're fighting against is these long-term trends in which being selfish, being tribal, being divided, and seeing others as an enemy." From a Chinese perspective, what do you make of this remark? Professor Chen?
I think I actually agree with Professor Sachs about the situation in the United States. A lot of, yes, I think actually like Professor Sachs said, you know, there has been a lot of indecision and lack of competence in handling the situation. President Obama actually has been putting this quite accurately in describing in the domestic level, you know, domestically in the United States. Indeed, we see a lot of confusion, befuddledness in handling the situation, in which a lot of bickering, blaming game has been going on between, you know, among between the federal level and also the states, and also, you know, among, you know, between different states. So that actually a kind of lack of coordination is exactly what President Obama has been describing about the situation in America in the recent scenario. And also internationally, there is also a kind of blaming game, you know, pointing fingers at China as a way to shirk the responsibilities that actually has been causing this disastrous scenario in the United States. So largely, it is tribal, it is divisive in both internationally and also domestically. On the other hand, of course, I believe President Obama's remarks have been regarded, you know, as a way to endorse Joe Biden's campaign to run for presidency. So in this way, actually, these remarks serves both as a critique of the Trump administration, but on the other hand, is providing actually support to the Joe Biden's campaign for presidency.
But the reality is President Donald Trump was very quick to turn things around, or at least he was trying to do so. He quickly launched this hashtag Obamagate, which went viral on Twitter. So, Professor Sachs, what do you make of President Donald Trump's Obamagate arguments, in that he said Obama was trying to sabotage his presidency, you know, making up this Russia collusion theory, the first ever president that spoke against the incoming president. What do you think about this?
Well, Trump's method of politics is never show any regret, remorse, admit anything, always attack, 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 attack. It definitely attracts followers. Trump has a support of 30 to 40% of Americans. A majority of Americans really dislike him. Many of us regard him as the worst president in our history, but he has a base, and the way he keeps the base is through this very aggressive attack. He lies, he cheats, he misrepresents, he exaggerates. Whatever he can do, the idea always is attack. So today it's Obamagate, yesterday it was China, tomorrow it will be something else. It's always trying to find somebody to blame. That's his whole political strategy. That has been his life. Failure after failure, he attributes to blaming others. It may also be psychological, because he displays traits of paranoia, according to many psychologists. But it attracts followers because demagogues like Trump definitely attract followers. They divide societies. They make us weak. They make us vulnerable to epidemics. But remember, it's not about Obama in particular or anything else, or about China for that matter. It's attack, attack, attack. No matter what you do any day, never show any self-awareness or any doubt, always attack.
So talking about Trump supporters, there are quite a few, especially after President Donald Trump launched this Obamagate comments on Twitter. Let's look at some of those things, if my colleague can kindly play those comments. This gentleman by the name of Bill Mitchell said, "Have you noticed no one in the media is defending Obama from the Obamagate charges? They're attacking Trump for making them." So Professor Chen, what do you think of Trump supporters? I mean, they were called the silent majority 4 years ago that helped Trump win this presidency. Their opinions were not necessarily reflected in the opinion polls. What do you think will happen this time around?
I think actually at this moment, because I think especially last year, late last year, when the economic statistics in the United States was quite good, so that actually Trump has got every hope in pursuing for the possibility of re-election. But now actually this pandemic outbreak has been wreaking havoc on his prospect of re-election. So he's pretty preoccupied about opinion poll results and also the prospect of re-election. So that is actually why actually he has been using various tactics to attack as a way to enforce his image. I think actually he's been trying to prop his image as a kind of omnipotent and omniscient figure, doing anything and able to know anything better than anyone else, this kind of figure, So in this particular context, I think Obamagate is actually an invention, actually a kind of coinage he has been using as a way to dramatize the scenario so that the people, the majority of his supporters would once again, to be attracted under his so-called charisma, this kind of, dramatic image of being a strong man, being, attacking, and being attacked and also, retaliating and attacking back.
Well, Professor Sachs, I understand that you will have to go soon. One final question for you. U.S.-China relations. I don't want to be too futuristic, but it's on many people's mind. That is, what will be the next administration's China policy? Kevin Rudd, the former Australian Prime Minister, said recently that a second Trump term will mean greater decoupling and possibly attempted containment, driven by his base, the anger over the virus. He also said if there's a Biden White House, strategic competition with China will continue, likely on a more systematic basis. Do you agree with that assessment?
I think what's important for China, by the way, is to reflect on the fact that aside from the United States, there are 191 other countries in the United Nations for China to have good relations with. So I think that, of course, what's happening in the United States is not only Trump, but a lot of foreign policy anxiety about China's success. And I am very much regretful about this because I think China's success is part of a world success. And a strong China, to my mind, is good for the United States and good for the world because it means more prosperity for everybody. But in the U.S., there are a lot of people who believe in the zero-sum idea, that if China gains, the U.S. loses. If China loses, the U.S. gains. I think it's a terrible and stupid idea, but there is a lot of belief in that. But from China's point of view, it's a big world. The U.S. is 4% of the world population, and there's another three-quarters of the world, aside from China and the U.S., and what's going to matter for most of the world is China getting along well with its own neighbors and with Europe and Africa and Latin America. So I don't think the relations are going to be very good between the U.S. and China. I regret that. But I think that China has a good answer, which is not just to look to the U.S., but to look to all of the rest of the world for good relations.
All right, Professor Sachs, thanks so much. Professor Chen, what do you think?
Well, I totally agree that actually the world is a large community in that actually too much preoccupation with the relations with the United States can be misleading to the future policies of China. I think the most important thing at this moment is for China to recover the economy and also to further and cement and promote better relations with the rest of the world. This is very important, so that actually any reckless and imprudent policies in Washington should not be diverting this principle. That is actually China should be concentrating on its own business, promoting its economic development and also to promote constructive relationship with the rest of the world. Africa, South America, Oceania and Asia. These are actually very important areas that China should be concentrating upon.
And then in what ways do you think the, President Obama's intervention politically and President Donald Trump's, hitting back on President Obama will affect the state of the U.S. presidential campaign?
Yeah, I think actually President Obama's comments largely serves two purposes. One is to serves as a critique of the Trump administration. The other purpose is obviously to endorse Joe Biden's advantage in its in the current trajectory of the in the campaign for the presidency. So I think actually this is actually the implicit motivation for Obama to be doing so, and Donald Trump obviously is very agitated by this, and he's trying trying every means to retaliate, trying to regain his losses. United States actually, apart from actually the fatalities, more than 80,000 fatalities, now is also suffering a heavy economic loss. The unemployment rate is now 14.7%. That actually has been causing a lot of disgruntled among the people and unemployed people, and also people who are actually now queuing and applying for support from the government because of this heavy impact of the outbreak. So I think actually this is a very critical moment, not only for Donald Trump but also for the whole United States political stage, in that some kind of according to Barack Obama, of course, this is actually the moment for regime change, and definitely Joe Biden is the one to replace Donald Trump, in his opinion.
Sure. I want to go to Laura Schwartz, political commentator based in America. Thank you so much for joining us, Laura.
Good afternoon. It's lovely to be here.
Well, your assessment on President Trump's effort to try to turn this around, accusing President Obama of, sabotaging his presidency, launching this Obamagate, thing that went viral.
It's interesting. This absolutely is a pattern of President Trump. When his poll numbers start taking a dive, when there's negative media information. Yesterday we saw his personal lawyers battling at the Supreme Court to keep his tax documents secret. We saw his doctors from the White House Corona Task Force testifying on the Hill that things are not as rosy as Donald Trump makes them appear, and we're still falling short on testing and other mechanisms to open up our country safely. So he takes to Twitter. He talks about President Obama. He tries to rile up his base support. They react to that, and that's where Donald Trump goes when anything like this happens. So it is a pattern, and he's doing this simply to deflect from the day-to-day news that he faces, which is not so positive for him as he's seeing his poll numbers drop and Joe Biden, his opponent this November, rise.
Well, what do you specifically make of Trump's argument in that he said Obama is trying to sabotage his presidency, you know, making up this Russia collusion theory, the first former president to, step on the toes of his successor?
Well, first of all, other successors have criticized other presidents before. In fact, this one has been criticized by Jimmy Carter, George W. Bush, H.W. Bush, Clinton, and now Obama, you know, where it was recorded on a phone call. So there is some precedent for that with this president, but no, it is not usual. But I think desperate times come for real measures. And when you think about what President Obama was talking about on the phone, it was all fact-based. Now, it's very interesting. To the first part of your question, you know, Donald Trump has looked at these allegations of Obamagate, which is really a deep state conspiracy theory that he launched these investigations out of political prowess. Not even his Senate Republicans can validate him right now. Not one of his Senate Republican allies said that they will look into President Obama. They are looking into how the investigation was conducted into Russian collusion, which we saw by the Bob Mueller report existed. And so if his Senate Republicans won't even back him on this, it really is unfounded.
Well, Professor Chen in Shanghai, you know, as China has largely kept its pandemic, the outbreak under control, how do you look at the efforts, the policies launched by the White House in containing the pandemic? We have over 80,000 casualties so far, unfortunately, on the other side of the Pacific. Professor Chen?
It is quite regretful for us to see actually in the United States things are really, you know, kind of disarray in that actually policies are disconnected. We see a kind of disconnection between, you know, the different states and also between the federal governments and also the states. So that actually, you know, a lot of policies are not properly to be designed and also to be implemented. That is actually the situation that has been causing a lot of, you know, confusion. And on the other hand, of course, there are also a lot of political infights among the administration. We see people are actually, you know, criticizing, you know, even, you know, recently there is this whistleblower, Mr. Dr. Bright, who was actually resigning from his position, and also pointing out actually the Trump administration's lack of common sense in promoting a kind of anti-malaria drug. So a lot of things are actually happening, and that actually has been contributing to the current disastrous situation. I think actually America is the biggest economy in the world, the strongest economy in the world. It has got the capacity to control the situation, but regretfully things are really getting out of control.
Well, Laura, as an American citizen, how do you feel about the White House's response to COVID-19?
I join the rest of the two-thirds of America who say that they trust their governor within their state more than the federal government led by the President of the United States. The President has clearly left it up to the states to handle this. The states had to fight each other and try to price each other out to get ventilators and to get proper protective equipment. And that is just wrong. But our governors on the state and our mayors on the local level have risen to the occasion. So really, I think we have to look to where we have leadership, and right now that is not in Washington, certainly not on this matter. Professor Chen said it very well. There's been so much infighting that has been caused by President Trump and his direct reports. There was enough here to deal with without causing these extraneous issues. We need to focus on testing, contact tracing, and isolation. We have to look at other countries of the world, including China, in how coronavirus is able to be controlled, and we can slowly and safely open our economies back up. But right now, we look to the states for guidance more than our president.
Well, Laura, talking about reopening the U.S. economy, even leaders of Trump's COVID-19 response team warned a Senate panel against moving too quickly to open the economy, which sounds pretty different from the allegations, the assertions of President Trump. What do you make of all this? Who gets to say when the U.S. economy should be reopened?
Well, I think that there can be a real concerted effort here, and I think yesterday was a good display of that, because you had members of the Senate, both Republicans and Democrats, looking to the public safety officials, if you will, these doctors, for assessment, because the public health and the health of our economy are directly tied together. So how can we make sure that we don't inundate our hospitals, have an uptick in spread? Because we're seeing where states have opened up physically, we've seen a rise, nearly 70% in some areas of infection. So we need to do it in a very calculated way and use the resources companies have used to work from home, that have used the economic stimulus from the federal government. And unfortunately, we do need another round of economic stimulus so that people can remain in place, keep the gatherings down to 10 or under, and fix this health part of it in the first place. Because until we have great testing abilities and tracing abilities, it's very difficult to see an economy that can work if we can't work.
Professor Chen, finally, your advice on to policymakers on finding the balance between reopening the economy and preventing more people from falling sick.
Yeah, I think actually the United States, the first wave is still rampaging. So that actually it hasn't reached the peak yet. So that actually any attempt to prematurely to reopen the economy, to kickstart the economy, can be a bit imprudent and also reckless. We must be remembered that the premature reopening can have its consequences. The United States is already having, this kind of suffering, this heavy losses economically and also in human life. So nobody can afford a further, more critical loss, if actually really things get even further out of hand, out of control. This can really, be definitely disastrous to the U.S. economy and also to the United States and also to humanity at large.
Right, Laura, we have about 1 minute left. Your thoughts on President Trump's, constant attacks on China surrounding COVID-19?
I don't think it plays well with our country as a whole. It plays well to his base, and he's trying to desperately hang on to that base. It is not a view shared by the entire country. Please know that, and we thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. I want to thank all of our guests, Laura Schwartz, U.S. political commentator from the U.S., of course, and also Professor Chen Tong at East China Normal University, and also Professor Jeffrey Sachs, Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, who was with us earlier. Thank you also very much. Very interesting discussion. And that will do it for this edition of Dialogue. I want to thank all of you for watching. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.